Who Do the Paramilitaries Serve in Chiapas? By Raul Romero, originally published in La Jornada and English translation by Schools for Chiapas, June 19th, 2023. The phenomenon of paramilitarism is historical and widely studied in Latin America. Paramilitaries are groups of armed civilians trained, financed, and/or enabled by states. Through violence, their task is to maintain control of the population, to eliminate resistance, and sustain local, regional, or national power groups. Paramilitaries are the irregular troops that perform tasks that, by law and agreement, regular armies do not usually carry out. These groups have political interests or serve those who hold them. In the second half of the 20th century, their role in Latin America was to counter the advances of popular armies and revolutionary guerrillas. Gilberto Lopez y Rivas has described how paramilitaries are used to implement tactics such as the hammer and anvil, in which the army is in charge of containing or immobilizing the rebel forces and the people who support them, while the paramilitaries carry out the attacks. This makes it possible for governments that use such strategies to deny that they are state operations, and even to go so far as to argue that they are merely intra-community conflicts. In Mexico, the antecedents of these groups are the White Guards, at the service of large landowners to facilitate land dispossession processes and reinforce control over the enslaved indigenous populations. Some of these structures survived the colonial period and were able to adapt and update themselves to the creation of the independent nation-state, with its formal army and its claim to monopoly on legitimate violence. Landowners and farmers relied on their private armies to guarantee their power and control over peasants and indigenous people. Also, in the second half of the 20th century, the Mexican state systematically resorted to paramilitary groups in order to repress movements. The names of the Olimpia Battalion and the Halcones at the service of the federal government and used to repress movements of 1968 and 1971 respectively, remain within the popular memory. Allied with the right wing in its youth, in states such as Puebla and Jalisco, there are experiences of how local governments formed or allowed paramilitary organizations to act with total impunity to repress members of popular structures fighting for a more just world. The public appearance of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, the EZLN, in 1994 was another moment in which the persistence of paramilitary groups, their links with the army, and the permissiveness and impunity guaranteed to them could be observed. Groups such as Paz y Justicia, Chinquilinis, or Mascara Roja attacked Zapatista and non-Zapatista communities in order to wage war against the EZLN, but also in order to sow terror among the population. The Actil massacre, where a paramilitary commando killed 45 indigenous people, is one such unforgettable event. Orcal, the paramilitary group that in late May shot a Zapatista base of support, has for years threatened Zapatista communities and show their support for the Green Ecologic Party of Mexico. In the case of Chiapas, since the advent of the democratic shift in 2000, the power groups and their paramilitaries changed the colors of their tricolor shirts in order to match those of the government in power. Blue, yellow, green, purple. Justice did not catch up with them, because when some were investigated, powerful structures moved to defend them, as has happened with part of the paramilitaries responsible for the Actil massacre, who were defended by Hugo Eric Flores. Similarly, former popular organizations were co-opted to operate on behalf of the state. Today, we also speak of second-generation paramilitaries, groups that inherited weapons, contracts, strategies, and the impunity, and that made paramilitarism a way of life. Although their origin is different from that of the traditional formations, their function is the same: to maintain control of the population, to eliminate resistance, and sustain themselves as a power group through violence. With the expansion of criminal corporations throughout the country, organized crime armed groups carry out operations equal to and expanding those of the paramilitaries, but at the service of a kind of parallel state that converges and intertwines with the formal state. The paramilitaries of the formal state and the armed groups of organized crime come to coincide and coordinate in their tasks of territorial control and expansion of criminal or extractive economies. In some cases, as has been documented in Oaxaca, the government of Ulysses Ruiz resorted directly to organized crime groups in order to carry out counterinsurgency and repression tasks. Identifying in the confusing panorama of Chiapas who the paramilitary groups serve and what are their interests is a key to finding those responsible for the years of war and those who today invoke it. As truth and justice await, for right now, one thing is urgent: to stop the war in Chiapas.